I sold my business for $30 million and took my daughter and her husband to the fanciest restaurant in town. When I stepped away for a phone call, a waiter whispered, "Ma'am, your daughter just poured something into your glass." I came back and switched our drinks 10 minutes later. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're watching this, please hit subscribe to her voice. Tell me in the comments which part shocked you the most. I stood there, frozen, the warmth of the restaurant wrapping around me like it had nothing to do with the storm I was feeling inside. My hand gripped the stem of my glass, feeling the chill through my fingers, and for a moment I just let myself notice the silence that had fallen over our table. The laughter, the clinking of cutlery, even the soft music floating from the piano. It all seemed distant, like it belonged to someone else. The waiter's words echoed in my mind. "Ma'am, your daughter just poured something into your glass." My heart stumbled, a cold jolt running down my spine, and I realized the room wasn't just quiet. It was holding its breath, waiting for me to react. But I didn't. I stayed calm, letting my eyes drift to them. My daughter smiled, perfectly composed, and her husband leaned back, that familiar smirk on his face. I forced my lips to curve into a small smile too, letting it hide the storm beneath. I set my glass down, gently, and took a slow breath, letting the warmth settle in my chest while my mind raced. Betrayal felt like a weight pressing on my ribcage, but anger wasn't my first move. Not yet. I let my gaze roam across the table, noting every gesture, every glance, every subtle interaction that might reveal the truth of their intentions. My daughter thought she was clever, but I had seen the smallest hints, the micro movements she couldn't hide. I sipped my wine slowly, deliberately, savoring it as a kind of anchor, letting it ground me while my thoughts calculated. The waiter passed by again, almost invisible, but I caught his eye, and there was something there, a flicker of understanding. I didn't need words. He knew what had happened, and I had corrected it quietly. That small solidarity gave me a strange calm, a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. Her laughter rang across the table, light, airy, but it carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. Her husband whispered something, leaning in, and I caught the subtle pride in her eyes. They believed they had the upper hand, but the truth was, they had underestimated me entirely. I let the smile on my face remain gentle, almost sympathetic, because I wanted them to believe they were still in control. Minutes passed, each one stretching like elastic, and I let the silence between us grow, the tension coiling like a spring. I remembered all the years I had spent raising her, guiding her, protecting her, and the ache of that memory sharpened the edge of my resolve. This wasn't just about the drinks. This was about understanding the full scope of their deceit and preparing for what came next. I shifted slightly in my chair, letting my hands rest lightly on the polished table, feeling the cool surface press against my fingers. Every movement mattered now, every small detail, every subtle interaction. My daughter tilted her head, her smile practiced and perfect, but I noticed the tension in her shoulders, the almost imperceptible bite of her lower lip. That tiny flicker told me everything I needed to know about her confidence. I thought of the city outside, the Chicago skyline glinting against the fading light, the river reflecting 1,000 fractured lights, and I felt a wave of clarity. This was a moment I had to navigate with patience, precision. I would not let fear or anger dictate my actions. I would observe. I would wait. And when the time came, I would act in a way they could never anticipate. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting the silence stretch, feeling the slow, measured beat of my heart. I exhaled softly, quietly, A single whisper of breath that reminded me I was still in control. I opened them and watched them again. The subtle arrogance, the way they thought they had deceived me, the quiet smugness. It all became a map of intention I could follow. I leaned back slightly, letting my body relax while my mind stayed alert, cataloging each smile, each glance, each whispered word. I had switched our drinks, yes, but that was only the first step. The real reckoning, the slow, inevitable justice, had not yet begun. I let the warmth of the wine ground me, while the clarity of my purpose sharpened like a blade behind calm eyes. Time passed almost unnoticed. The restaurant around us continued its rhythm, cutlery, laughter, hushed conversation, but at our table, something unspoken hung heavy. I watched my daughter move her hand toward her glass again, noting every motion, every microbeat. She was confident, but there was a tension, a rhythm in her movements that betrayed her control. I allowed myself a quiet, almost imperceptible smile, knowing that patience was the most potent power I had. The storm was inside me, but it was quiet, controlled. I did not flinch. I did not show the slightest tremor, because strength was measured in calmness, in composure, in the slow gathering of power that no one could see until it struck. I placed my glass down one final time, letting it rest against the polished table, and breathed slowly, softly. The waiter moved past again, discreet and unobtrusive, and I caught his eye, a brief nod of understanding passing between us. My daughter's attention was elsewhere, her laughter still light, her husband leaning in close, and they were completely unaware of the quiet calculation happening across the table. And in that stillness, in that tension-filled pause, I realized something deeply important. Betrayal might be sharp, but patience was sharper. I had seen the signs. I had felt the intentions, and I was ready. Not with rage, not with confrontation, but with a quiet, unyielding power that would unfold in its own time, with precision, with inevitability, and with a clarity they could never anticipate. I watched them carefully, letting my eyes linger without giving away what I knew. Every movement, every smile, every whispered word between them felt like pieces of a puzzle I had been assembling for hours. My daughter laughed again, light and musical, but there was a tension beneath it, a sharpness that made my chest ache. I let the ache settle quietly, like a weight pressing against my ribs, while I reminded myself. Patience was everything. Her husband reached across, brushing his hand against hers. The motion was casual, practiced, but I noticed the flicker of pride in her eyes, the silent satisfaction of someone certain they had won. I clenched my fingers lightly in my lap, feeling the smooth wood press against my palms, and breathed slowly, deliberately. I could not rush. Their arrogance was a gift I intended to use, a flaw they had laid bare for me. I sipped my wine carefully, letting it settle in my chest, grounding me while my thoughts spun quietly in the background. The waiter had warned me, his voice low and cautious, and now I understood the magnitude of what had almost happened. But I had acted first, quietly, subtly, and that small victory gave me a calm strength. I let my lips curve into a small, polite smile, as if I were still unaware, letting them believe they had the upper hand. Minutes passed. The rhythm of their conversation continued, full of easy gestures and polite laughter, and yet every word carried a hidden edge. I catalogued each glance, each flicker of expression, noting the confidence and the arrogance, storing it like evidence. My daughter believed she had anticipated me, but I had anticipated her. And that knowledge brought a quiet warmth, a subtle power that coursed just beneath my calm exterior. I leaned slightly forward, letting my hands rest lightly on the table, fingertips brushing the edge, feeling the smooth polish under my touch. I watched her tilt her head, a practiced motion she had perfected over years, but I saw it for what it was, a shield. And I let myself smile inwardly, because beneath the shield was doubt, just faint, just enough for me to know that cracks were forming. The city outside the window stretched into evening, the Chicago skyline glittering as the light faded. I let the calm of that view fill me for a moment, a reminder that the world continued beyond this table, beyond the deception, beyond the small acts of betrayal. I let the warm, dim light of the restaurant settle around me, feeling it wrap me like armor, steadying the rapid beat of my heart. Her laughter rang again, and I noticed her hand hover briefly over her glass. She had done it once before, thinking she could fool me, but now I let the observation simmer quietly, knowing the slow build of awareness was far more powerful than a sudden confrontation. I let the tension stretch like a string pulled taut, letting every second add weight to what was coming. A waitress passed by, almost imperceptibly, and I caught her eye briefly. There was a flicker of understanding there, subtle, silent, and it gave me a strange sense of reassurance. Small alliances like that mattered, tiny threads of connection that reminded me I wasn't entirely alone in this. My daughter's gaze met mine for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression that spoke volumes. I let my smile remain gentle, patient, hiding the quiet storm that had begun to settle in my chest. Time slowed. Each tick of the clock, each clink of silverware, each soft murmur of nearby diners became part of the rhythm I was following. I sipped my wine slowly, deliberately, letting it anchor me while my mind measured, calculated, and plotted. The warmth of it was grounding, a reminder that I could remain steady while the currents of betrayal flowed around me. Her husband chuckled softly at something she whispered. Leaning in as though I weren't even there, I felt a flicker of heat in my chest, a flash of anger that I swallowed, letting it dissolve into the calm that had become my armor. I could act with precision, I reminded myself. I did not need to rush. Impulsiveness was a weakness, and I had been shaped over decades to recognize and wield patience as my sharpest tool. I shifted slightly, resting my hands lightly in my lap, allowing my body to appear relaxed while my mind cataloged everything. I noted the tension in their shoulders, the subtle hesitation in her laughter, the tiny twitch of his jaw. Each small motion became part of the story, each hint of confidence or doubt a thread in the web I was quietly weaving. The waiter returned once more, his movements discreet, and I let my eyes meet his. There was a silent reassurance there, a wordless acknowledgement that the danger had been caught before it could unfold. I let my lips curve into a faint, polite smile, not needing to speak the gratitude I felt. The staff had seen, they had helped, and now the stage was ready for what I would allow to come next. I leaned back slightly, letting the chair cradle me while my mind worked quietly. My daughter and her husband continued their conversation, oblivious to the careful observation, to the quiet power gathering in my chest. I felt a slow exhale leave me, a soft whisper of breath that reminded me of my control. I was steady. I was patient. I was ready. And in that moment, as the lights outside shimmered and the room held its subtle rhythm, I realized that their arrogance had given me the perfect advantage. I would not act out of anger, not yet. I would let the tension build, let the suspense stretch until it became unbearable. And then I would move in a way they could never anticipate. The evening continued, and I felt the quiet weight of every choice I had ever made pressing in on me. My daughter laughed at something trivial, her eyes sparkling with a confidence that I had once admired, but now only served as a reminder of what had been broken. Her husband leaned closer, his smile easy, certain, unaware that the moment he assumed control, the strings of this little scene had already been subtly rewired. I let myself exhale slowly, letting the air carry a calm steadiness I did not yet show in my face. I sipped my wine deliberately, feeling it settle, grounding me, anchoring the storm of awareness building quietly in my mind. Every gesture across the table was a story, every glance, a confession hidden under the pretense of normalcy. I watched her hands, the tilt of her head, the way she leaned in, pretending casualness, pretending charm. It was all theater, and I had been given the rare gift of the front row seat. The waiter moved past again, silent, unassuming, and I let my eyes meet his briefly. A flicker of understanding passed between us, quiet and unspoken. He knew what had been attempted, he knew I had corrected it, and that silent solidarity was comforting in a way I hadn't expected. It reminded me that I was not alone in noticing the cracks, in observing the subtle betrayals that could so easily go unseen by others. Time moved differently in that space. Seconds stretched, holding weight, pulling taut around the table as if the air itself understood the tension. I felt the familiar flicker of anger, a heat I tamed immediately with a slow breath. This was not a moment for rash action. It was a moment to watch, to collect, to let them reveal the true measure of themselves. My daughter believed she had already won. She had no idea how thoroughly I had seen every move, every intention. I leaned slightly back, resting my hands in my lap, letting my body appear relaxed, almost inattentive, while my mind catalogued the subtle details, the slight bite of her lower lip, the way her husband's hand lingered a little too long on hers, the casual tilt of his chair. They all painted a picture of arrogance and assumption. And it was in that arrogance that the advantage lay. Patience had become my closest ally. I felt a quiet tension coil in my chest, not like fear, but like the soft pull of a rope being drawn taut. I let the warmth of the wine settle there, the slow, deliberate heartbeat beneath my ribs, a reminder that I was still grounded, still steady, still fully in control. Each soft exhale, each blink, each small shift in posture was deliberate. I had learned long ago how much power lay in stillness, in calm observation, in the act of waiting for the perfect moment to act. Her laughter sounded again, musical and light, but I noticed how it wavered, almost imperceptibly. Her confidence was not as perfect as she believed. I let my smile remain gentle, almost sympathetic, because I wanted her to think she had fooled me. That illusion was precious. It would make what came next all the more devastatingly clear. I shifted my attention to the room, letting the soft hum of conversation and the clinking of glassware form a backdrop that seemed distant, almost irrelevant. I was only aware of them, of the tiny gestures, the subtle expressions, the layers of intention folded under polite manners. Every small flicker of hesitation became a marker, a note in a quiet score I was composing in my mind. Her husband leaned in again, speaking softly, and I noticed the way his voice carried just a touch too much certainty. I allowed myself to imagine the tiny cracks forming, the subtle unease that would ripple through him when the careful construction of his confidence began to crumble. I did not hurry it. I sipped again, slow, deliberate, letting the warmth settle as I calculated the next steps in quiet detail. The waiter returned once more, moving past our table as if invisible, and I let my eyes flick to him, a small nod passing silently. This subtle support, this quiet acknowledgement, felt like a tether, a reassurance that the world beyond the table recognized the truth I had seen. My daughter's eyes met mine for the briefest instant, a flash of doubt hidden behind practiced ease, and I let the small, almost imperceptible smile play at my lips. I noticed the subtle tension in her husband's jaw, The way his hands now rested lightly on the table, his posture just slightly more rigid. Each second stretched, each soft exhale, each heartbeat felt like an arrow drawn back. I was not here for spectacle. I was here for quiet, unyielding control. I had corrected the immediate danger, but that was only the beginning. The real reckoning, the slow, inevitable unraveling, was yet to come. I leaned back in my chair, letting the soft upholstery cradle me, and I exhaled again, longer this time, allowing the calm to settle fully into my bones. I had learned over decades that the quiet presence of observation could wield far more power than loud confrontation. I watched them, catalogued them, breathed them in as if this very tension were a tangible thing I could hold. And in that moment, I felt it, the slow, steady certainty that patience would deliver everything they had not expected. Their arrogance, their confidence, their sense of control, it all hung in the balance, suspended in the delicate space of my composure. I would not rush. I would wait. I would let them continue believing they were in charge, all while knowing the truth of what I had seen and what I intended to do. I reached for my glass, lifted it slowly, deliberately, letting the reflection of the candlelight shimmer across its surface. The warmth of it grounded me, the weight of it in my hand a quiet reminder that I was still present, still in command, and still ready. I sipped slowly, allowing the silence to stretch, the tension to build, the scene to unfold exactly as it needed to, and I knew, without a doubt, that the reckoning would come. The restaurant seemed to shrink around us, the noise of other diners fading into the background as I focused on them. My daughter's smile was still there, but it no longer reached her eyes. Her husband's confidence was beginning to feel brittle, as though the first cracks were forming in the armor they had built. I let the quiet observation wash over me, each small movement, each glance catalogued and filed away. I shifted slightly in my chair, letting my hands rest lightly on the polished wood, the coolness grounding me. I sipped my wine slowly, deliberately, letting the warmth settle and remind me that calm was my weapon tonight. I watched them talk, watched their gestures, and I noticed how even the smallest acts, the way her fingers brushed the stem of her glass, the subtle tilt of his head, spoke louder than words. The waiter passed by again, a quiet presence at the edge of the scene, and I caught his eye. A flicker of understanding passed between us, wordless and steady. I exhaled softly, letting the tension roll out just a little, as if I could share it with him without saying a word. He had been my quiet ally from the start, and I allowed myself to feel a small comfort in that fact. They laughed at a joke I hadn't heard, leaning in closer to one another, and I felt the faint sting of a memory, the ease with which they believed they could charm and deceive, the confidence that I would never see beneath the surface. But I had seen, I had observed, and every micro-expression, every subtle misstep, was now a part of the quiet reckoning I was preparing. I let my gaze drift briefly to the window, the lights of Chicago twinkling like 1,000 distant eyes, each one reflecting pieces of the world beyond this small, tense bubble. I drew a slow breath, letting the calm settle in my chest. My body appeared relaxed, almost disinterested, while my mind worked quietly, steadily, mapping the landscape of their intentions, their arrogance, their assumptions. Her laughter broke the moment again. Sharp, a little forced, and I noticed the subtle hesitation in her voice. Her husband's smile faltered for the briefest second before he corrected it, and I felt a quiet satisfaction that I could allow myself without triumph. This was not about revenge yet. It was about clarity, about patience, about letting the tension rise until it was undeniable. I shifted in my chair, leaning just slightly forward, letting my hands rest lightly, fingertips brushing the polished wood. I noticed how her eyes flicked to mine once, a fraction of a second, and I held her gaze calmly, letting the silence stretch. That fleeting doubt, almost invisible, was a thread I could pull, a crack in their confidence that would grow larger if I simply remained steady. The waiter moved past again, and I allowed my gaze to meet his briefly, a quiet acknowledgement passing between us. He knew the gravity of what had been attempted, and he had watched as I corrected it silently. That reassurance, small as it was, anchored me. I let my lips curve into a faint, polite smile, careful not to betray any hint of what I was planning, while my heart beat slowly, deliberately, in my chest. The conversation at the table continued, polite on the surface but layered with tension beneath. I could see it now, the way my daughter's shoulders stiffened, the slight tightening of her husband's jaw, the careful placement of his hand on the table. They thought they were performing a scene for me, but in reality I was reading it all like an open book. Each gesture, each glance, each carefully practiced expression told me everything I needed to know. I leaned back, letting the chair cradle me, feeling the quiet strength settle in my shoulders. I had been patient, careful, deliberate. I had caught the small act before it could harm me, and I had allowed the tension to build naturally. I knew that the true moment, the moment where control shifted quietly but completely, was coming, and I would be ready. I picked up my wine again, letting the glass rest lightly in my hand, the warmth spreading slowly through me. I felt the small tremor of satisfaction in that knowledge, the knowledge that I had observed, that I had corrected, that the stage was set for what would unfold next. My daughter's glance flicked toward mine again, sharper this time, and I let my smile remain calm, steady, almost neutral. The subtle panic there made me breathe a little deeper, quietly, like a soft exhale into the tension. Outside, the city continued on its way, unaware of the quiet storm at our table. I let the contrast settle in me, the movement of life beyond this small bubble, the small act of control I now held here, invisible yet potent. I felt my body relax in the knowledge that patience was stronger than any immediate action. That calm observation could wield far more power than confrontation ever could. Her husband shifted slightly in his seat, unaware of the silent calculation I was conducting, and I let the small, almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw register in my mind. Every detail, every micro moment was now part of the quiet plan I had been assembling for weeks. I had been patient, yes, but patience had sharpened me, focused me, made me almost invisible in my calm until the perfect moment arrived. I let my gaze wander briefly around the room, noting small details, the glint of silverware, the subtle reflections in glass, the movements of other diners. Everything was part of the atmosphere, part of the tension that I had allowed to accumulate naturally. I let my lips curve into a soft, reflective smile, not of triumph, but of quiet certainty. I was in control, and they had no idea, and in that stillness, in that careful observation, I realized something important. The small act of deceit, the tiny attempt at harm, had revealed more than I could have anticipated. It showed me their arrogance, their assumptions, and most of all, their blind confidence in thinking they could outsmart me. I let that knowledge settle slowly, like a quiet fire, warming me with the certainty that the reckoning I had planned would unfold exactly as it should. The soft hum of the restaurant faded into the background as I focused entirely on them. My daughter's laughter had grown slightly strained, the ease she had shown earlier cracking under a subtle tension she could not fully hide. Her husband's posture remained confident, but there was a faint stiffness now, almost imperceptible, that I noticed immediately. I allowed my calm to stretch between us like a quiet, invisible line, measuring every motion, every glance, every breath. I let my hands rest lightly on the table, fingertips brushing the polished wood as if it were an anchor for the storm inside me. I sipped my wine slowly, deliberately, feeling it settle deep in my chest, grounding me. Each movement across the table, the tilt of her head, the subtle shift of his chair, the faint pause in her smile, was a note in the quiet symphony of control I had begun to orchestrate. Patience was my weapon, and they had unwittingly handed me all the pieces. The waiter moved past once more, nearly invisible, and I let my eyes meet his briefly. That tiny acknowledgement, wordless and unspoken, reminded me I was not alone. He had seen the attempt, he had watched as I had corrected it, and he understood the stakes in this room. I exhaled softly, allowing the tension to roll off me for a single heartbeat, as if letting the world know I remained steady while the others floundered in their false security. Time slowed in that space. Every sound, cutlery, murmured conversations, laughter, seemed distant, filtered through the lens of the quiet observation I had maintained. I noted how my daughter's hand hovered just a little too long near her glass, the subtle sharpening of her eyes when her husband leaned in to whisper something. Each small gesture was a confession, a reveal of confidence and fear intertwined, and I catalogued them all silently. Deliberately, I leaned slightly back, letting the chair cradle me, appearing relaxed while my mind measured, weighed, and waited. The warmth of the wine in my hand was a steady reminder of control. The calmness of my breathing, slow and deliberate, let me maintain clarity, even as my heart thumped quietly in anticipation. I had corrected the first act of betrayal without drama. Now the next phase, the slow, inevitable unraveling, would begin. Her laughter came again, forced and brittle. I noticed it immediately, the way it faltered at the end, how it didn't reach her eyes. Her husband, sensing the small shift, leaned in closer, but the movement was defensive rather than casual. I allowed the tension to grow naturally, letting them carry the weight of their own assumptions. I did not need to speak. My calm, my stillness, was the sharpest message I could send. I took another slow sip of wine, feeling the warmth spread through me, letting my mind stay sharp and quiet. I observed the tiny quivers in her hand, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, the small nervous glance exchanged between them. They thought they were confident, but confidence under observation can crumble quietly, invisibly, and I let that knowledge settle like a slow, sweet flame in my chest. The waiter returned again, his steps soft, almost a whisper, and I let my gaze meet his. There was a shared understanding there, subtle and wordless. The danger had been averted, the first move corrected, and now the tension that had been building would begin to bend in my favor. I let a faint smile play at my lips, not triumphant, but calm, reflective, full of the quiet fire I had learned to carry for decades. I watched them, cataloging every interaction, every gesture, every subtle shift in energy. Her husband's hand rested lightly on the table now, fingers flexing slightly, betraying a small, hidden tension. My daughter's eyes flicked to mine for just a fraction of a second, and I held the gaze steady, letting the silence stretch, letting it press lightly against her awareness. I could see it then, the moment she realized she had underestimated me. I shifted my body slightly, letting my hands rest naturally, and exhaled softly, quietly, as if the breath itself were a tether connecting me to the calm clarity I had cultivated. I was not angry, not yet. I was patient. I was steady. I was preparing, quietly, for the inevitable revelation that would expose every assumption they had made, every arrogance they had carried like armor, the city outside the window, Chicago lights flickering against the evening sky was a quiet contrast to the storm of observation at our table. I let it remind me that life moved on, that the world outside our bubble was unaware of the quiet reckoning forming here. And that knowledge gave me a strange comfort, a reminder that I could act with precision, with patience, with quiet inevitability, and no one could anticipate it. Her laughter faltered again, the cracks widening just slightly. I let my hands rest lightly, picking up my wine, feeling the familiar warmth anchor me. Every heartbeat, every subtle shift, every quiet movement told a story I had already read. And now, with patience as my weapon and clarity as my guide, I could begin the final acts of this quiet, inevitable reckoning. I leaned back one final time, letting the chair cradle me fully, exhaling slowly, softly. I allowed the calm to settle in my shoulders, the warmth of the wine to steady my chest, the quiet observation to sharpen my focus. They had tried to deceive me, to manipulate me, and yet they had done exactly what I needed. They had shown themselves fully, unknowingly, and I had taken careful note of every flaw, every subtle hint, every micro-expression that revealed the depth of their arrogance. And in that quiet, deliberate stillness, I realized something with a slow, steady certainty. The betrayal they had attempted, the arrogance they had carried, had only served to prepare the path for the quiet, inevitable justice I would deliver. I was calm, I was patient, and when the moment came, it would be precise, unyielding, and completely unexpected. I felt the tension at the table thicken, subtle but undeniable. My daughter's smile wavered again, and for the first time, I noticed a hesitation in her movements, a slight faltering in the confidence she had worn like armor. Her husband leaned forward, trying to steady the energy, but even he could not mask the flicker of unease I had quietly planted without ever moving a muscle. I let my calm presence fill the space, a quiet weight pressing on their awareness, and I sipped my wine slowly, deliberately, savoring the warmth that steadied my chest. The waiter passed by again, almost silently, and our eyes met for just a moment. No words were exchanged, but there was understanding there, subtle and precise. The first act of deception had been intercepted, but now the true unraveling was about to begin. I exhaled slowly, letting the air carry the quiet power I had nurtured over the last hour. My hands rested lightly in my lap, letting my body appear relaxed while my mind continued to catalog every gesture, every glance, every subtle twitch of muscle that revealed more than words ever could. Her laughter rang out again, but it was forced, brittle, lacking the ease she had tried so hard to project. Her husband attempted to cover it, leaning in, speaking softly, but I saw it. The small, almost imperceptible crack in his posture, the tension in his jaw that he tried to mask with casual words. I allowed the silence to stretch, a quiet, invisible pressure pressing against the fragile confidence they clung to so tightly. Each heartbeat became a metronome for the suspense building, each breath a reminder that patience was now my ally. I tilted my head slightly, letting the dim restaurant lighting catch the edge of my features, and I noticed the subtle shift in their energy. My daughter's hand hovered near her glass, still cautious, and I smiled inwardly. The small act she had attempted before, the tiny threat, had revealed far more than she could have imagined. And now, in this quiet, deliberate moment, I allowed myself the satisfaction of watching the seeds of their doubt take root. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the soft upholstery cradle me, and I exhaled slowly, letting the warmth of the wine settle deep in my chest. Each passing second carried weight, each gesture they made revealing more than they intended. Her husband's voice lowered, and I noticed the slight falter in her responses, the way she searched for reassurance in a glance I no longer offered. I stayed calm, steady, deliberate, letting them believe that everything was as it had always been. The city outside continued its rhythm, lights twinkling in Chicago's evening, a stark contrast to the quiet storm building at our table. I allowed myself to draw strength from that contrast, from the reminder that the world beyond this room moved on, unaware of the careful observation and patient strategy unfolding here. My calm was my shield, my patience my sword, and each subtle shift in their behavior only sharpened my resolve. I watched them closely, noting every small movement. Her husband's hand flexed lightly on the table, almost imperceptible, a quiet signal of tension. My daughter's eyes flicked toward me again, a tiny flash of uncertainty that she could not mask fully. I smiled gently, inwardly, allowing the calm to radiate outward. The quiet power of observation had been my ally all along, and now it was preparing to deliver the inevitable consequences. I reached for my wine glass, lifting it slowly, deliberately, letting the reflection of the candlelight shimmer across its surface. I exhaled softly, a quiet sound that carried no urgency, no anger, only calm, measured patience. I had intercepted the small act of betrayal, observed their weaknesses, and allowed their confidence to build to the point where it would serve me fully. Now, the pieces were in place, and the moment to act would arrive quietly, unexpectedly, and completely out of their control. Her laughter faltered once more, the cracks widening just slightly. I let the silence stretch, allowing the tension to become almost tangible. Every gesture they made now, every glance, every subtle shift in posture was a reflection of the growing unease I had planted without movement, without confrontation. I remained calm, grounded, letting the quiet strength of observation do its work. I tilted my head again, sipping my wine, feeling it warm me from the inside out. Each heartbeat seemed amplified in the quiet room, each subtle pause carrying weight, each breath a reminder that I was fully present, fully aware, and fully in control. Her husband's voice lowered, the confidence faltering, and I smiled just slightly, letting the small warmth of satisfaction settle. They had revealed themselves entirely, unknowingly, and now the quiet reckoning could begin. The waiter moved past again, near enough for a flicker of acknowledgement, distant enough to remain invisible. I let that subtle support anchor me, knowing the moment of confrontation was approaching in its own time. Patience had carried me this far, and now it would guide the final steps. I leaned back, letting the warmth settle fully into my shoulders, letting the soft exhalation release the tension I had contained so carefully. I knew, deep in my chest, that the final act, the moment when the arrogance and confidence they had relied on would crumble completely, was near. I felt the quiet power building, the suspense thickening, and I let the calm of decades of life experience steady me. Every detail, every micro-expression, every unspoken hesitation had been recorded in my mind, and now I would use them with precision. Quietly, deliberately, without a word wasted, without emotion wasted, with absolute control. I tilted my head one last time, letting my gaze meet hers for just a second, and I let the silence stretch fully. The small flicker of doubt in her eyes was the signal I had been waiting for. Her husband's subtle tightening of his hands on the table was the final confirmation. I exhaled slowly, a quiet, steady breath, letting the calm energy fill me. The stage was set, the reckoning was ready, and it would unfold in the perfect, quiet, inevitable way. I watched them for a final moment, letting the calm settle over me like a quiet cloak. My daughter's eyes widened slightly, her confidence faltering, and her husband's jaw tightened, the tension I had quietly cultivated now fully evident. I raised my glass slowly, letting the reflection catch the light. And they finally realized, too late, that the quiet patience they had underestimated held a power far greater than their arrogance. I set my glass down gently, a soft exhale escaping me, and let my gaze meet theirs fully. The silence carried everything they needed to know: the betrayal they had attempted, the control they assumed they had, the reckoning that had been patiently waiting. No words were needed. Their faces reflected the quiet devastation of realizing how completely they had misjudged me. I stood, letting my chair scrape softly against the floor, and they remained frozen, caught in the weight of their own actions. I walked toward the exit, the warmth of the night air wrapping around me, a calm smile settling on my lips. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't loud, it's quiet. Deliberate and inevitable. If you've ever been underestimated, trust the power of patience, and never let anyone make you doubt your own strength. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story will remind you. Justice has a way of finding its moment.